I walk a straight line, shackled and chained. Oh, gruesome Gertie is calling my name. There is no mercy in this penitentiary. Just ask the Hillstring Gang or Angola 3. I'm here for life, I'm here to die. Inside these walls, inside the wire. And when the wolf cries, I know it's over. Oh, bloody Angola. Oh, bloody Angola.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Bloody Angola, a podcast 142 years in the making, the complete story of America's bloodiest prison. I'm Jim Chapman, and today I'm bringing you the horrific story of one of the current inhabitants, if you will, of Bloody Angola. And the subject today is going to be Roy McLaughlin, who in August of 1999 was arrested and charged with the murder of his wife, Marianne McLaughlin. So let's get right into it. Now, I'm going to take you back to June of 1998. And Miss Marianne McLaughlin, she tells her 15-year-old son that she's going to go meet with her husband, Roy, who she was estranged from at this time, and she said she was going to discuss their divorce. Now, she had filed for that divorce the month prior, so she goes missing on July 11th of 1998, and on July 12th, the very next day, she is officially reported missing by her family. So police knew right off the bat who to investigate for this. They were handed the same set of circumstances and facts I just gave you. An estranged husband, she's telling people that she's going to meet this guy, and then she goes missing. It's pretty obvious, right? Well, this case would be more challenging than it may seem on its face. First things first. Police start digging into Roy and Marianne's relationship. And they discover that Roy and Marianne were scheduled to appear in court just 4 days after she went missing. Now, that appearance would be to address child custody. They had 2 teenage children, as well as a restraining order that Marianne had filed due to Roy having a violent temper. They were also going to discuss some child support issues at that hearing. So the initial investigation had a lot of problems, most notably the lack of physical evidence. They had a ton of circumstantial evidence already in this case, but they didn't have any physical evidence. Nobody knew where Marianne was. She was still missing. There was no body, although they probably suspected foul play right from the beginning. So police start interviewing people who knew the estranged couple. And several of these folks would say that Roy had taken the divorce pretty hard, and that he had said more than once that he would kill his wife if she continued to seek a divorce. Those threats, coupled with the sudden disappearance of Marianne, that's going to raise immediate suspicions that foul play was for sure involved here, and police would continue to pack on evidence, though it's all circumstantial at this point. Now, that doesn't mean you can't prosecute a case just because it's circumstantial. Plenty of people have been found guilty of things based solely off of circumstantial evidence, but you'd like some physical evidence there as well. So police would discover that 2 days after Marianne disappeared, Roy had his rental car professionally cleaned, And he emphasized to the detailer, this was at a car wash. They had some detailers there that would actually detail your cars. He emphasized to that person to vacuum the trunk several times. As a matter of fact, he stood next to this guy, according to the detailer, and said, vacuum it again. So think about that for a second. Who vacuums the trunk of a rental car, much less several times, standing over an attendant and making sure he does it right? Now, just about a week after his wife's disappearance, Roy does get arrested, but not for the reason you would think. He is actually caught in a Mississippi hotel trying to get underage girls to pose in lingerie in his hotel room and take pictures of them. Apparently, one of the young girls reported this to police. They go pick him up, and he goes to jail on that charge. In this missing case, sadly, it pretty much turns cold at this point. There are no leads. They just all dried up. No physical evidence, and although police had an idea Roy was involved in this, he wasn't talking, at least to police. Inmates, that's a completely different story. It seemed that old Roy, he can't keep his mouth shut around all these inmates. So in June of 1999, while he's sitting in the East Baton Rouge Parish Prison awaiting trial on those charges stemming from that hotel arrest, he tells an inmate not only that he killed Marianne, but apparently he drew a map to the location of her body. So that inmate, in hopes, obviously, of getting a lighter sentence, I'm sure, for one of his crimes, he turns this information over to authorities. And he agrees to testify to what Roy McLaughlin told him. Some of the specifics of that: he told this inmate that he killed her because she said she was divorcing him. The inmate also said that, according to Roy, he admitted to smothering Marianne with a pillow and disposing her body in a forest. Now, it's important to mention that the map that this guy said Roy drew of the location of Marianne's body was saying the body was in the Atchafalaya Spillway, which, if you are not from Louisiana, the spillway is like a swampy body of water here. Not really what you would think of as a forest. So there was a little bit of a contradiction there, but regardless, he did admit to killing her, and this inmate was willing to testify. So that was enough for the Baton Rouge DA, who at that time was Doug Morrow, to seek a grand jury indictment for the murder of Marianne, even without a body. So Roy does indeed get indicted for the murder of his wife after the evidence was presented to a grand jury. And he was already in jail by this time, so he just remained in jail. And it's important to mention, by this time, he had already sued the sheriff's office for slander. He claimed that he was wrongfully portrayed as the prime suspect in his wife's murder by the sheriff's office, and he sued them for $10 million, but lawsuit did not go anywhere. It was thrown out eventually. So Roy remains in the East Baton Rouge Parish Prison awaiting trial, and then a major break in this case, when in December of 1999, the remains of Marianne McLaughlin are discovered in Mississippi in what's known as the Homachito National Forest. Now, this was 18 months after her disappearance. A hunter who was hunting in that forest, he came across a human skull, and that human skull was identified through dental records as being the remains of Marianne McLaughlin. Now, where those remains were discovered were also very significant because they were very close to a property owned by Roy McLaughlin. That's not by accident, right? And with this new evidence, prosecutors were at least going to have some sort of physical evidence now to present. And when they tested those remains, not only did the time frame fit, they also had the proximity to that property. Another good piece of evidence. That's just way too coincidental that Roy McLaughlin owned property very, very close to where they found those remains. So it obviously made this case pretty damaging for Roy McLaughlin. So in March of 2001, this trial starts. And I'm going to cover for you every single thing that happened to this poor woman that came out in that trial. And for reference, I'm getting this directly from the magistrate judge's report, and it covers all the facts that came out during that trial. So it came out during the trial that on May 13th of 1998, there was an outstanding warrant for the arrest of Roy McLaughlin out of East Baton Rouge Parish on a felony charge of issuing worthless checks. Miss McLaughlin reported to the EBR Sheriff's Office that Roy was at her home in Baton Rouge and could be apprehended on that charge. She knew that that warrant was out there. So officers from the sheriff's office, they arrived at Miss McLaughlin's home to arrest Roy, but he sees them coming and he actually escapes arrest by jumping through a bathroom window. In the report, the officers describe Miss McLaughlin's demeanor at the time Roy escaped as visibly shaken and scared. Now, on that same day, she filed for divorce and for a temporary restraining order against Roy. So Roy fled from Louisiana to Boone, North Carolina. A friend of Roy's, a guy by the name of Floyd Miller, helped Roy find a job with a commercial debt recovery business in Boone, North Carolina. So after Roy had worked and lived in Boone in temporary corporate housing that company supplied for him for several weeks, he goes to his friend Floyd. This was on June 10th of 1998, just after he received his first paycheck. And he tells his friend, hey, I'm going to travel to Baton Rouge after work. This would be on June 12th, 1998, to pick up his vehicle and other personal items. Police had evidence, though, and that evidence indicated that Roy never returned to work on June 11th of 1998. On that date, he actually rented a 1991 Chevy Lumina from Mac Brown's Chevrolet dealership. This is in North Carolina. And when he rented that vehicle, Roy did not advise that he planned to drive the vehicle out of state. Instead, he told the employee who rented the vehicle to him that he had recently moved to North Carolina and that he was renting the vehicle so he could familiarize himself with the area. So this guy had no idea that he was about to drive this rental, several states over to Louisiana. So the guy rents him the vehicle, and that was for a 4-day period. Roy then drives the rental car from Boone, North Carolina to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and he checks in at what was known as the Quality Inn Hotel on Sherwood Forest Boulevard. That's a major boulevard in Baton Rouge. This was at approximately 8:56 p.m. This was on June 11th of 1998. So the Quality Inn, that was located only 4.5 miles from Miss McLaughlin's residence. And it's the closest motel you can find to that residence, which is also awfully convenient. So upon checking into that Quality Inn, Roy gives the hotel manager the correct name, but he provides a false address, and he also provided a false vehicle description. Why would you do that?
Jim, did you see what happened in Texas today?
Wait, before you tell me that, let me tell you what happened in New York.
It cannot be as crazy as the case I told you about yesterday in Louisiana.
You know what? We should do a podcast about it.
And with that, we did. Crime Wire Weekly covers the crime news headlines that have dominated the week.
We cover trending crimes from all over the country and even sprinkle in a few globally.
Crime Wire Weekly is available now wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Simply by searching Crime Wire Weekly or clicking the link in the description of this podcast. So around this same time, the youngest son of Roy, he goes to visit friends. And this is at about 7:00 p.m. that night. This was June 11th of 1998. And he tells his mom, I'm going to visit friends. And when he leaves, Miss McLaughlin is there at the home by herself. Her 1994 Caprice Classic was also present at that residence. And according to the son, Miss McLaughlin never told him that she was going to go anywhere that evening. So her son returns home at about 11:30 that night, at which time the vehicle is gone and his mother is gone. But he found something strange. And y'all remember, this is 1998. So Miss McLaughlin had left her pager at home, and this was very uncharacteristic of her. She always had her pager with her. Look, this was infancy of cell phones, y'all. Everybody existed with a pager, and they never left it at home. It's kind of like cell phones now. So her son notices this, and he contacts his older brother. And his older brother says, well, she mentioned to me that she planned to meet with Dad to discuss their marital situation, but he wasn't sure when she was supposed to do that. She just mentioned that she was going to do it. So it was kind of an assumption that's where she went, to the brothers. Now, while one of the brothers was at home that night, he gets a phone call from Roy, his dad. And Roy asked if Miss McLaughlin was home. The son tells his dad that she was not at home, and Roy said, well, she must not have gotten back yet. She'll be in shortly. So upon the advice of his older brother, the younger brother, he spends the night at a friend's house that night. This is June 11th of 1998. And the next morning, he went to a basketball camp at his high school. And now we're on June 12th of 1998. And at approximately 6:25 a.m., Roy calls the Yellow Cab Company from a payphone in Baton Rouge, and he requested the cab pick him up from what's known as Benny's Car Wash. The cab company says okay, and they asked him his name, and he says John. He doesn't tell them Roy. So the taxi cab says, that's fine, we're on the way. And at that point, Roy drops his rented Chevrolet Lumina off at that car wash. This is at 6:29 a.m. He then leaves that car wash in the cab that he had called for. So they were going to detail it, and he didn't want to wait around for that. And how do they know when he arrived and when he left to get it down to that exact time? Well, there was video surveillance at that car wash, and they could actually watch his comings and goings. So the cab driver who picked up Roy, he testified in court that Roy told him he had dropped off his wife's car at Benny's to be washed. Roy tells the cab driver that he wants to be taken to the Quality Inn. The cab driver brings him back to his hotel. Now, shortly after Benny's opened that day, this was at 8:15 a.m., Roy contacts Benny's Car Wash, and he tells them he wants the super clean service to be performed on that Chevy Lumina he had left there. So they weren't even open when he dropped it off. He also requested that the trunk of the car be vacuumed and indicated he would pay the extra cost of $2 to have that service be performed. When the trunk of that Lumina was cleaned at Benny's, the carpet inside of it was intact. And I'll tell you why I'm bringing that up later on. So at approximately 10 a.m. of that day, Roy travels to Gonzales. That's an outskirts of Baton Rouge. And he's inside of Miss McLaughlin's car, and he gets a haircut in Gonzales at a barber shop. Now, a friend named Dolores, a friend of Roy's, who cut his hair that day, she testified she asked Roy to go visit her fiance, but Roy told her he couldn't do so because he was going on a boat ride with his brother. Now, Roy's brother, however, testified at the trial that Roy had no plans to go on a boat ride with him. So he obviously lied to this lady. He, as a matter of fact, said he hadn't spoken to Roy since the prior Thanksgiving. And he went on to say more than likely he was working on June 12th of 1998. So he would have never told Roy, hey, we're going to go for a boat ride if he's working. Now, Miss Dolores, the one who cut his hair, she also indicated that when he left the barber shop, he drove in the direction of Baton Rouge in a Chevy Caprice. And according to the Quality Inn records, that hotel he was staying at, he checked out of that motel at 12:28 on June 12th of 1998. Now, at some time around noon of that day, Roy called Miss McLaughlin's home again and spoke with his son again, who at this point had arrived home from a basketball camp, and he asked his son if Miss McLaughlin had made it home. His son said, "No, Dad, she hadn't made it home yet." And at that point, Roy told his son that Miss McLaughlin had gone to Mississippi with a friend to buy a new car because she was giving him her current car, that Caprice. So his son says, "Oh, so you're in town?" And he replies that he was in Baton Rouge, but when his son said, "Well, where are you?" he wouldn't tell his son where he was calling from. Now, later that day, the older son, he contacted the East Baton Rouge Parish Sheriff's Office when Miss McLaughlin did not show up for Danny's baseball game, which was very out of character for her. So the older brother knew something's not right here. A sergeant by the name of Steve Young, he arrives at the home that evening around 7:30 p.m., and he and a detective by the name of Shane Evans, they search the home and they find no evidence of anything that would indicate like a physical struggle, an incident where she was basically attacked in her home and maybe somebody stole her car and took her at gunpoint somewhere. None of that. They did find, however, several overdue bills, and that suggested that maybe Miss McLaughlin was experiencing some financial difficulties at the time, which, hey, you're getting a divorce, you're a single female raising 2 kids, probably pretty tough for you. So the older brother, he explains to the detectives assigned to that case that his parents had separated a month earlier and that his mother had mentioned to him that, "Hey, I'm going to meet with your dad to discuss this divorce." He did say that she did not specify a date for such a meeting, but did mention that they were going to meet. The older brother also told the detectives about the substance of some phone conversations that I've already told you about, where his younger brother had talked with his dad, Roy. So at this point, the police are like, "Oh yeah, something's not right here." They issue a be on the lookout, a BOLO, for Miss McLaughlin and her Caprice Classic vehicle. So at approximately 5:00 p.m. on June 12th of 1998, Roy returns to that Benny's car wash and he's in Miss McLaughlin's Caprice Classic. He leaves that there. He picks up that rented Chevy Lumina and he leaves the car wash. The very next day, June 13th of 1998, he calls Miss McLaughlin's home again and he speaks with his older son this time. And he tells his older son, "Hey, go pick up your mom's car at Benny's because I left it there to get it cleaned." Now, according to his older son's testimony at trial, Roy would not tell him where he was when he called, and he also mentioned that he didn't answer any questions about where Miss McLaughlin was, other than to say she had gone to Jackson, Mississippi last time he heard to buy a brand new car. The older brother did indicate, however, that such explanation of his mother's whereabouts was kind of suspicious to him because his mother was not in a financial position at that time to buy a new car. And the detectives can speak to that. They saw all the bills. So at that point, the phone conversation ends and Roy drives to the Days Inn in Brandon, Mississippi, which is outside of Jackson, Mississippi, kind of an outskirts of Jackson. And he checks in to that Days Inn motel. This is at some point before 11 p.m. on June 13th of 1998. And when he checks in under a false name. He gives a fake address. He even gives a fake vehicle description again upon checking in. Also on June 13th of 1998, the East Baton Rouge Parish Sheriff's deputies, they secure Miss McLaughlin's Caprice from Benny's. So the older son, he's not a dumbass. As soon as he got off that phone, he called the police and said, "Hey, my mom's car is at Benny's car wash." So they said, "We got it. We'll go pick it up. We'll scrub it for DNA or whatever." And they picked that vehicle up. In the meantime, they obtain a warrant to search that vehicle. And during their search, they find a copy of the bill from that Quality Inn in Baton Rouge that Roy was staying at inside that vehicle. Also, while they're searching that vehicle, they find tax receipts from a Mississippi property listed in the name of Roy McLaughlin. That would come into play later on. They also pulled a latent fingerprint from Roy's left middle finger from the interior passenger door window of that Caprice. So fast forward 3 days to June 16th of 1998. And after receiving a complaint about Roy, Brandon City police officers, they obtained a search warrant to search his room at that Days Inn in Brandon, Mississippi. When Roy arrived at the Days Inn, he arrived in that rented Chevy Lumina, and the Brandon City police lieutenant, a guy by the name of David Ruth, he runs a check on the car's license plate. And he finds that it's a rented vehicle rented by a guy by the name of Roy McLaughlin, and that he was wanted on an outstanding felony warrant in Louisiana. Remember those worthless checks. So he gets arrested, and the police search his room at that Days Inn motel room. And the search reveals a partially full box of Tide detergent, a large amount of clothing belonging to Roy, a dry cleaning receipt from a dry cleaning business in the area. And the police also searched the car, and they found that the carpet inside that trunk and portions of the padding under the carpet had been removed, that the spare tire was gone, and that the area of the trunk where the spare tire was stored contained a considerable amount of soapy water and some very fresh rust. And why is that important? Because when the attendant at that Benny's car wash actually cleaned that trunk, all that shit was there. It wasn't missing. Police also lifted some latent fingerprints from the driver's side rear corner of the trunk lid, which were identified as belonging to Roy. So at that point, Roy is transported from Brandon, Mississippi to East Baton Rouge Parish because of that outstanding warrant for checks. And upon that transfer, they searched Roy McLaughlin, and they find a check in the amount of $721.06 inside Roy's pocket that was not endorsed yet, but was made out to both him and his wife. Now, according to testimony that was presented at trial, that income tax check refund had been at Miss McLaughlin's home, where it was mailed to her in June of 1998, which is important because Roy at this time was living in North Carolina. So a bunch of time passes, as I told you at the beginning of this episode, and eventually he gets indicted for the murder of Miss McLaughlin on August 12th. Of 1999. Then, as I told you, on December 27th of 1999, human skeletal remains are identified. They discover that human skull and other remains inside that forest. A forensic pathologist, Dr. Alfredo Suarez, he testified in the trial that although Miss McLaughlin's body significantly decomposed at the time he examined it, the condition of the remains were not inconsistent with someone who had died as a result of strangulation or suffocation. Evidence presented at trial also indicated that Roy owned several tracts of land near the remote area of the Homachita National Forest where her skeletal remains were found. In the testimony of one of the co-owners of the property owned by Roy in that area, a guy by the name of William Myrick, he indicated that he and Roy had hunted in that area extensively and that the petitioner was quite familiar with the territory. That was very important in this case. The state also presented the testimony of one of Roy's fellow inmates at the EBR Parish Prison. His name was James Johnson. And as I told you, he testified he had been housed in an adjoining cell to the petitioner, and that because of the similarities in the case, and what I mean by that is Johnson was in prison on a charge of second-degree murder of his fiancée. He said because he was in jail for that, Roy confessed to him, hey, man, I know how it feels. I killed my wife. Johnson also testified to various details concerning Miss McLaughlin's family history and her marital situation, which he had learned from Roy. And that's important because He knew those facts, which means Roy really talked to him. He wasn't just making all this shit up. Now, information concerning Miss McLaughlin's family history was confirmed by her mother at the trial as well, just to prove this guy was telling the truth. Johnson also testified that he had not learned such information or any other information about Roy's case from the newspaper because Roy always removed reports concerning his case that were in the newspaper before Johnson would read it. According to Johnson's testimony, Roy admitted that he met with Miss McLaughlin at the Quality Inn near Sherwood Forest in Baton Rouge on June 11th of 1998. He said that during that meeting, Miss McLaughlin told Roy she wanted a divorce. He said when she would not agree to reconcile with Roy, they got in an argument and Roy smothered Miss McLaughlin with a pillow and cut her body up in the hotel bathtub. Johnson testified that Roy told him he killed Miss McLaughlin because if he couldn't have her, no one else could. Roy also told Johnson that after the murder, he took his rented car to Benny's Car Wash, had the vehicle and trunk cleaned to remove any evidence. Roy also told Johnson he had committed the, quote, perfect murder, and that the state would never find where he hid different pieces of Miss McLaughlin's body. Now, according to Johnson, Roy, in explaining the murder, appeared to have enjoyed killing Miss McLaughlin. And finally, Johnson testified when the reports arose of the skeletal remains of Miss McLaughlin having been discovered, Roy yelled, quote, "Oh shit, I'm fucked." Now, during the trial and all this evidence, etc., that was presented by the state, Roy did not testify on his own behalf. No surprise really there. And although 8 witnesses and 3 exhibits were presented by the defense, there was no evidence that would establish any sort of alibi for Roy to have on the dates and times in question. Why? Because he fucking did it. Furthermore, another one of the fellow inmates of Roy's at the parish prison, a guy by the name of Barry Luger, testified that during the defense's case that he provided a signed statement to the police indicating that Roy confessed to him that he had killed Miss McLaughlin. And that was really the cusp of that trial. Now, a couple of points I'm going to bring up. One, the map that Roy allegedly drew while in prison, indicating where he disposed of his wife's body, it was introduced into evidence at trial. And as I told you, it was kind of strange because the map showed that he disposed of her body in the Atchafalaya Basin rather than the Homachita National Forest. However, when police tested that for fingerprints, guess what? Roy's fingerprints and his palm print were on that map, so he definitely drew it. Also at trial, testimony was presented indicating that although Roy's 15 and 17-year-old sons were without a guardian and without money after Miss McLaughlin disappeared while Roy was still in Baton Rouge, Roy never went to that home to take care of them or offer them any money. He knows that their mother is missing. This is his 15 and 17-year-old sons. And you're telling me an innocent man would not say, hey, you need to come live with me till we find your mother. Or at the very least, give him some freaking money. Roy also never coordinated any sort of effort to locate his missing wife. He never contacted the residents again to find out if she returned home after the phone calls that I'd already told you about. And also another thing in this trial, the prosecution, they produced over 60 witnesses and over 200 exhibits on their side. So they had plenty of evidence. So everything I just told you comes out. And in March of 2001, Roy McLaughlin, who at this time is 41 years old, is convicted in the second-degree murder of his wife, Marianne McLaughlin, after a 7-day trial. And he's sentenced to life in prison inside of bloody Angola. But if you think that's it, end of story, think again. It's really just beginning. How about 3 escape attempts and 2 monumental lawsuits? get ready because this case is fixing to blow your mind. And I'm going to bring you the rest of this story on the next episode. Thank you so much for listening. Hey, check out Crime Wire Weekly. I do that with Unspeakable's award-winning host, Kelly Jennings. Every Friday, we drop the headlines trending across the nation in the world of crime, and we give our own unique commentary on that. You can find it just by searching Crime Wire Weekly wherever you listen to this podcast, and I'll also link in the description the links to it on various platforms, and you can follow it just like you do Bloody Angola. Check out the Patreon at patreon.com/Bloody Angola podcast for commercial-free early releases and more. Thank you so much for listening. And until next time, I'm Jim Chapman for Bloody Angola, a podcast 142 years in the making, the complete story of America's bloodiest prison. Peace.
I walk a straight line, shackled and chained. Oh, gruesome Gertie is calling my name. There is no mercy in this penitentiary. Just ask the Heel String Gang or Angola